Hello everyone. I'm pleased to see that there's a few less people in here now than there were earlier on this morning, and I camouflage myself quite well against the backdrop, so if I disappear at any point then just prod me. So yes, I'm presenting a project that we undertook at Aintree University Hospital at the beginning of the year, and it was really quite an interesting project to get involved with. It actually had two streams, an educational one and one in terms of major incident planning. So I'll start off by setting that scene slightly. I'll discuss some of the aims that we had, and then I'll talk through how we went about trying to achieve those, the results we got, and I'll discuss briefly some of the successes we had and some of the pitfalls. So the recent UK terrorist attacks, I think, have put an emphasis on institutions looking at their major incident plans and becoming prepared for potential incidents. And this is certainly something that was going on at Aintree Hospital, which is our regional trauma centre. The undergraduate training curriculum for trauma is quite limited, and actually the clinical exposure that undergraduates get can also be quite limited and is very dependent on what they see when they're in an attachment with the trauma unit. So we thought perhaps about combining some experiential learning for undergraduates with this major incident planning exercise. So we were trying to evaluate how we could combine this and what the students might be able to get out of it. So to give you a little bit of the background towards the project, it was a fictitious incident, and it was one of a multiple bomb explosion in the L1 with lots of secondary devices and other potential catastrophic events. And we were estimating that that would generate about 50 to 100 casualties, and that about 27 of those would pitch up at Aintree. So we recruited 27 Liverpool medical students, all in their 4th and 5th years. They were given a very comprehensive briefing about major incidents and complex trauma management in that setting. And they were then presented with a file each to carry, and this represented one trauma patient in that pathway, and they carried that file through all of the processes that they would take through the trauma system at Aintree. So we used opportunities through that pathway for individual teaching and small group teaching sessions, and the topics of learning were all recorded by the medical students within that case file. And they documented lots of other things as well, and they received teaching at various points. For example, in our resus, as you can see here, small group and one-to-one teaching. And also that continued if the patient then moved to the CT scanner or then went up to theatre or to the major trauma ward. So at various points along that pathway, here you've got 2 anaesthetists teaching, but there was also A&E consultants, radiology consultants, neuro anaesthetists, etc. So to give you an example of one of the files, here we have a 28-year-old male who was injured in the bomb blast with multiple injuries to his upper and lower limbs, and a penetrating abdominal injury. So he was really quite sick, and there was lots of potential within this case then to talk about hemodynamically compromised patients and the initial trauma management that you would do for that. And then in the file, they then progressed on to a deterioration and the need for damage control surgery. So at lots of different stages, there were different elements of the trauma management to discuss with the medical students. They documented lots of things in their file, and the management side of it, we wanted to know whether there was latent errors in the trauma systems. So we were looking at timings, we were looking at equipment availability, we were looking at staffing levels and blood availability. So they were documenting all of that, and then separately as well documenting all the learning topics that they were covering. So we found that 89% of the students documented learning topics. Only 3 didn't engage with that side of the documentation. 27 different learning topics were documented, and the largest in one log was 12. So here we've got a representation of all the different elements that had been covered by those giving teaching. Those in bold and slightly larger are the ones that were frequently documented. So as you would expect, perhaps when managing major trauma, they were being taught things about damage control, resuscitation, the management of pneumothoraces and burns, of head injuries, traumatic cardiac arrest, and then lots of other topics around that as well. So I think we established that there was a very broad base of topics covered. However, not all students received all teaching topics, and some students who had less severely injured patients in their file felt they didn't have as much of an opportunity for the teaching because bad things didn't happen to their patients. And now we tried as best we could to include them in the teaching in resus, but if they were held within the majors unit in the department and then went to the trauma ward, they may have missed out on that. A number of the 4th and 5th years then, as a percentage of that year group at university, received the teaching, and obviously they discussed that with their peers, and there was quite a general sort of impression that this was a really good thing potentially, and the students seemed really engaged and very positive coming back from having done this follow the file exercise. So we concluded that this was a very safe environment to teach trauma to medical students. It's non-threatening, they're not real patients, so we don't have that clinical distraction that you might have in a real trauma setting where really you can't devote necessarily that attention to teaching the medical students. And having followed the case files through, I think it's more likely that the things that they were taught would stick with them. So this real experiential learning they can take a lot from. It was a very successful exercise in exposing these students to multiple trauma scenarios, because in that small group teaching they then pooled their case mixes and learnt from each other's cases as well. And this all happened within the space of a morning. So the bomb blast went off theoretically at about 9:30, and the first patient started to arrive at about 10:30, and we were all wrapped up with the exercise at 12 o'clock. So it was quite a short time for the medical students, but I think they gained a lot from it. So major incident macro simulation in a mature trauma system like the one at Aintree provides a very good opportunity to educate the undergraduates in that complex trauma management in a non-threatening environment. Thank you. Are there any questions?